Greetings. My name is Reem June. I am the Director of the Flood Planning Division with the Texas Water Development Board. With me today, I have Gavin Lewis, who is the Head of Engineering with Fathom, a UK-based company that develops global computational modeling on flooding. Myself and my division has been working on developing a statewide flood planning program with the last several years. The first draft state flood plan has just recently come out in May of 2024, and we're working towards developing the final state flood plan. The statewide modeling played a key role in identifying flood hazard in this process. And today we're going to present on statewide future condition flood hazard analysis with Fathom. And this is for the second cycle of flood planning effort. Next slide, please. Texas water development was created by the 55th Legislature of Texas in 1957 after the devastating drought in the 50s. Knowing that more droughts were inevitable, the board was charged with securing the state's water supply by planning and preparing for future droughts. Our operations have evolved over the decades. The 86th Legislature of Texas in 2019 gave us a new focus: statewide flood planning and mitigation. Today, we fulfill the mission through three key functions: science, planning, and financing. Since the inception of TWDB in 1957, the board has made over 5,700 financial commitments for over $35 billion across the state through our various financial assistance programs. Next slide, please. So why flood planning? Texas is big. We have 268,000 square miles of land area. We do have 30 million people in Texas today. It's expected that the population of Texas will grow to 51 million. With this large land area comes the varying geographic coverage and rainfall distribution that you can see on the map on the slide. So that requires some planning towards our current flood hazard and the future flood hazard that's expected in the future. Texas also has a very long history of flooding. The NFIP claim in the state between 1978 and 2021 is over $17 billion. In the wake of Hurricane Harvey, in 2019, the Texas Legislature passed Senate Bill 8, which created regional and state flood planning program. The legislature charged TWDB with creating flood planning regions based on river basins and administering the process. It mirrors our successful water planning process. We have been administering the state's water planning process for over 25 years now. Next slide, please. So how do we plan? It's a statewide flood planning, watershed-based, as you can see on the map. So we have divided up the state into the 15 regional flood planning groups based on 15 river basins. Some of these river basins were divided to upper and lower because of the sheer size of this river basins and how it also varied in rainfall distribution and geographic coverage. Sometimes even usage of the land varied. So they were divided into bottom and top river basins. It's a completely bottom-up approach, which means that regional flood planning groups are self-governing. The local people often know the most about their regions. They convene their volunteer group members, voting members. One of them became a chair, and their officers, they ran the entire process. They identified where their flood hazard was. They identified what's the solution that would be needed. The state flood plan integrates the information from the 15 regional flood plans that were generated by the 15 regional flood planning groups. Next. One of the first tasks that the flood planning groups were tasked with was to identify and compile comprehensive flood hazard in each region based on best available information. TWDB assembled various flood hazard data for the state of Texas and sewn it together in a floodplain quilt just before the first planning cycle. These data included National Flood Hazard Layer, or NFHL, estimated base flood elevation data, or BLE, and digitized paper flood insurance map for farms. Correct that the BLE is the base level engineering, not estimated base flood elevation data. The regional flood planning groups are expected to review, confirm, and enhance this flood hazard data in flood quilt based on local information. However, even with all of this data put together, there were approximately 63 counties that did not have any existing flood hazard map at the beginning of the first planning cycle. This is where the cursory floodplain data or Fathom flood modeling data came in. Various flood data set that existed with various different inputs, methodologies, resolution, and vintage, which did not enable TWDB to have a coverage in some of the areas where there was no coverage. So TWDB worked with Fathom to generate a statewide coverage, and we called it cursory floodplain data set. The regional flood planning groups were only encouraged to use it where no other flood hazard information was available. In some cases, the planning groups actually utilized Fathom or cursory floodplain data set over old digitized map from years ago. So with that, I'm going to pass to Gavin to talk about what was done during the first cycle.
Thank you, Reem. So Fathom were contracted to produce a consistent pluvial, fluvial and coastal flood map across the whole state, and using the data that was available. As terrain is a huge impact on any flood model, our first step was really to understand what was available regarding terrain data. Fortunately, the state have recently flown LiDAR across most of the state, so we were able to ingest the raw LiDAR data, clean it up and produce a consistent statewide digital elevation model, as you can see here. It took a lot of work to bring all that together, but that was a great starting base for us for consider the modelling going forward. We then ingested a number of inputs for the pluvial, fluvial and coastal modelling from regional and localised and national data sets as they were available. So using our proven automated modelling framework, we ingested the new digital elevation model and the inputs as we've just described, and that took us less than 6 months to combine the digital elevation model, develop that, put that into our automated modelling framework and produce pluvial, fluvial, coastal flood maps for the whole state. And in this example here, you can see that one of the outputs was a downscaled 3-metre resolution data set. So this is a fluvial map where we thematically shaded the different depths. This data was essentially, as Reem talks about, passed out to the regional flood planning groups. And I think, as you can see here, where we have filled in the gaps between the floodplain quilt, so the existing data sets that were available to TWDB, and where we filled in the gaps, not only on the rivers, so for the fluvial flooding, but also you can see the speckling there for the pluvial flooding. And we were able to combine both of those and really give a much more detailed, consistent view of flooding across the state. Reem.
Okay, so I will take you to one of the regions and how they utilize the Fathom data in the first planning cycle. So one of the tasks in the regional flood planning process required the regional flood planning groups to perform an existing and future conditional flood risk analysis comprising flood hazard analysis that determined the location, magnitude, and frequency of flooding, flood exposure analysis, which determined who and what might be in harm's way, and the last one was vulnerability analysis. So I will just focus on the first one, which is flood hazard analysis. This is one of our regional flood planning group, Nueces Regional Flood Planning Group. It encompasses the entirety of the Nueces River Basin and borders the San Antonio River Basin and the lower Rio Grande Basin. The Nueces River fits into Corpus Christi Bay, as you can see on this map, and is largely rural in nature. This group supplemented floodplain quilt information with Corpus Christi drainage study, followed by FEMA preliminary date, FEMA effective data, FEMA approximate data, the first American flood study, and then followed by Fathom cursory floodplain data set, which for them generated eventually a full coverage for this regional floodplain group, which they did not have before this process. The existing flood hazard analysis in Region 13 revealed some information like 2 counties are lacking any flood hazard data or mapping. That's where they utilized Fathom data set. 8 counties have potentially inaccurate maps, given maps that they are dated prior to 2010. 8 counties have potentially inaccurate data due to new rainfall data that was published in 2018 that increased rainfall by more than 30%. Next slide, please. So this is our statewide look at where are our flood hazards. So once all of the regional flood planning groups compile their data set, this is how our state looks like. You can see a coverage of 100-year flood, or 1% annual chance flood, 500-year flood, or 0.2% annual chance flood. And then something that's we called flood-prone areas. This was identified by local communities through public outreach, both online and by local public meeting effort. This coverage covers various data sets, including the statewide cursory floodplain data set or Fathom data set that was generated during the flood cycle. The plan confirms that the flood risk across Texas is significant and widespread. Almost 1/4 of Texas's land area is in either the 1% or 0.2% annual chance flood hazard area, with approximately 21% of the land area, or 56,000 square miles, within the 1% annual chance flood hazard area. There is a significant risk of flooding within all 15 regions, although the extent and types of flood hazard vary by region due to differences in population, land development, topography, rainfall pattern, and proximity to river and the coast. Approximately 1 in every 6 people in Texas live or work in known flood hazard areas, including in the 1% and 0.2% annual chance flood plains. Next slide, please. The future condition flood hazard analysis, what was done during the first cycle? All of the regional flood planning groups were required to come up with a future condition flood hazard area, and they did. TWDB provided guidance on utilizing 4 methods to come up with it, and the regions utilized one of those methods to come up with the future condition. However, we see a variability in future condition coverage because it was developed with various methods. So then TWB thought that perhaps we can do the same thing as what we did with existing condition flood hazard analysis with the first cycle. We contacted Fathom and are currently working with them to develop a future condition flood hazard analysis considering rainfall and climate variability. We worked with the Texas state climatologist to determine what that amount will be. The future condition will also look at land use change, sea level rise, and subsidence. So that's the effort that's currently ongoing, and I'm now going to pass on to Gavin again to talk about what is happening with this effort.
Thank you, Reem. Well, yeah, before I get into the detail, as you saw, that this is not just a FUB modeling exercise to look at future flood conditions. There are some other very interesting elements we're building into that future view of flood risk across the state. And this is pretty unique, and this is one of the first projects that has looked at a whole range of future conditions. So again, similar to phase 1, we need to validate the terrain data. And since the start of phase 1, 10% of new coverage of LiDAR data has been produced. So we essentially wanted to make sure that we have a consistent view between phase 1 and the current phase 2 process. So we built in the new LiDAR data set. And we adopted some new methodologies on cleaning up the data, and we've produced a totally new data set for the whole of the state with those new data sets incorporated, and we've used that as to rerun our phase 1 model to get the baseline data set. So that's really given us a good understanding of the the differences between the current phase 1 and phase 2 models. So once we've basically essentially brought in the terrain data, one of the key things here was to look at the future conditions. And we've split those, as we did in the first modelling process, to pluvial, fluvial and coastal data. And you can see here some of the range of conditions that we're looking at here. So we've taken the present day flood models. We've working with the state climatologist. We selected a range of GCMs, so global circular models, an ensemble of those models to select effectively the change factors that we apply specifically to the pluvial, fluvial and coastal data sets. So on the pluvial side, we selected 4 GCMs from the high resolution model, or the high resolution intercomparison project, which is called high-res MIP, which is a subset of GCMs from the CMIP6 ensemble. For the fluvial data, we used 2 hydrological models from AECOM 2B, driven by 4 GCMs from CMIP5, producing essentially 8 ensemble members. On the coastal side, we used the IPCC's regional AR6 sea level projections used to generate coastal sea change factors. So we calculated those factors and applied them to the boundary conditions in the model, reran the model, and were able to produce the future conditions for current and 2060. So across the state, we were able to get a current and a future view of flood risk using publicly available data sets with the guidance of the state climatologist to output the data. So that gives us a good understanding of the delta regarding future conditions between the current and 2060. These are some examples of the range of change. In this case, this is extreme precipitation, and the changes in precipitation under a 2.5 degree warming scenario. We give 3 different scenarios with the 17th, 50th and the 83rd. This essentially provides a central range of 66% of distribution as recommended as the likely range by the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change. So when we combine those, we can see here, particularly in the right-hand side, we've got quite a significant range between the 17th and the 83rd percentile, indicating there is some uncertainty in some of the GCMs ensembles that we're using. So we need to build that into the model and take an account of that uncertainty in our outputs. We next looked at changes in land use and urbanization. And we looked at this both in a rural and an urban context. We used a range of different data sets from the USGS and also the Surgo maps to map land use for non-urban areas. We differentiated between urban and non-urban areas, particularly the change in urbanization, where there was going to be infiltration rates were embedded in the data for the current view. And of course, when those urbanized environments extended into those rural areas, that level of infiltration was impacted and reduced. So we were able to present a present day and a 26 view of flood inundation, accounting for changes in floodplain roughness across both the pluvial, fluvial and coastal models, and accounting for future infiltration rates in non-urbanized areas. And in urban areas, we assumed certain implementations of urban drainage networks that were built into our pluvial model. So we're able to represent quite a detailed view of change in the land use on the flood risk going forward, and the various projections that are associated with that. Next, we looked at subsidence, particularly in the Harris-Galveston subsidence district. Here we're able to capture the data for across the region, and effectively this ranges from between 2018 and 2022. So we're able to interpolate the point data from the above data sources to represent a raster grid at 3-meter resolution, as you can see here. We used an empirical Bayesian cribging tool to interpolate the points to a 30-meter resolution surface. We were then able to implement in our model, assuming, and what we did here for the comparison between the current view, as seen here, and the future view, we assumed a value of a constant rate of subsidence between now and 2060, and we resampled the terrain data to represent that for the future view. So essentially, we had a 3-meter resolution of change in the ground levels across Texas from the 2020 baseline to the 2060 projection. And then we were able to input that into our flood model and develop that as one of the additional change factors in the outputs. So this is one of the initial outputs we've produced. As you can see here, this is for coastal region, where we're comparing the 1 in 100 return period for the present day in the left-hand side for 2020, compared to the future view for 2060 for a 1 in 100 year event under a high emission scenario. And you can see there's obviously some change in the inundation and the depth of that inundation across the region. So as Reem alluded to, we're currently in the process of producing the data sets. We've done a lot of work with the Reem's team and other entities across Texas, including the state climatologist. And we're now in the process of combining all that data set and running the models, and we'll be providing the output over the next months back to the Texas Water Development Board for them to review and then ultimately roll out to the regional flood planning groups. Reem, thank you very much.
Thank you, Gavin. So we are currently in the process where we have completed the first cycle of regional flood planning and about to start the second cycle of regional flood planning. I mentioned at the beginning of our presentation that the flood planning groups are self-governing. We will make this information available and put it in the hands of the regional flood planning groups. They are required to generate future condition flood hazard information for each of their region, so they will be able to use this information. However, when generating their solutions, I think this will be very helpful for looking forward-looking information when people are looking at solutions, generating solutions. So with that, I'll complete our presentation. Thank you very much for listening to us today, and we look forward to seeing you at SFPM.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.